Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology prospecting method. I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today we have a very special guest, Lisa Bloom. Lisa is the founder of Story Coach. She works with entrepreneurs and business owners to help them attract ideal clients and find their most powerful stories. She trains coaches to use storytelling as a powerful approach to impact their clients and grow their business. And she works with organizations developing story leaders, creative yet resilient cultures, and leading powerful change processes with the power of storytelling. Lisa's a professional storyteller. She's an accredited coach, author, speaker, mentor, and leadership expert. She is the author of 2 bestsellers, The Story Advantage and Cinderella and the Coach. And she is the creator of the Selling Through Story and the Certified Story Coach program. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Wendy. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So what is the Lisa Bloom story? What is the backstory? How did you become the story coach?
So, it's funny you say, what is the story? I think we all have many, many stories. And so I never, I always feel like you can't boil everything down to one simple story. But having said that, I've always loved storytelling since I was a child, but didn't really see it as part of business or my business direction for many, many years. In fact, I began in learning and development in organizations and then explored coaching. And it was only much later that I realized that there's something about the storytelling experience and the coaching experience that make a ton of sense, that fit together. And also realized at the same time that many small businesses, many organizations are really lacking this incredible skill of storytelling, because essentially storytelling is all about connecting and building trust. And without it, I think, businesses really don't fare so well. And so that's how I fell into storytelling for business. And it's been a fascinating journey.
Yes. And so let's talk a little bit about why stories. Why are stories and storytelling, why is that important?
So storytelling really spans every culture, every language, every country. It's the way people have connected since the beginning of time. It's the way people have shared what's going on in their lives, and it's the way people have created meaning. And so that hasn't changed, essentially. We still use story to create meaning in our lives and create meaning in our communication and in the way we connect with people. In business, when you tell a certain type of story, so it's not the stories that traditionally might have been designed to get people to think a certain thing, a more manipulative type of story. But when you tell authentic stories, what happens is you almost instantly build trust and build connection with potential clients. And so it becomes a very, very powerful business tool.
So can you give us an example of an authentic story versus an inauthentic story?
It's interesting you ask that. I think that authenticity can't be faked. I think we sense it. We feel when somebody's being inauthentic. So when you go into a store and you put on, an item of clothing, you try on an item of clothing, and the assistant comes along and tells you how stunning it looks, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you hate what you see. They're telling you a story of, they start telling you about why it looks so wonderful and why you should buy it. And it's a story that just doesn't ring true. It's completely inauthentic, and you feel it and you know it to be true. And what happens is, in most cases, or certainly what happens to me and most people I know, is when you're told an inauthentic story, not only do you not believe the story, but you lose faith and you lose trust in the teller and of the story and in the organization that stands behind the teller. So there are certain stories that I just don't go into because I don't believe what is being told to me. And it might be because of an assistant, or it might be because of their marketing. But when you get a sense of a real, authentic story, then you feel it and you trust it and you connect with it and you see yourself in it. And that has a whole different experience. Just today, I was looking up a particular charity online, and there was this wonderful video about the story of the founder of this charity. And it talked about, he talked about his childhood and how he, his mother became ill and how it gave him a real sense or sensitivity to health, and how, how good health is so important, and how as he got older and took on all kinds of meaningless roles and jobs, he was called back to something that was more basic to his experience. Anyway, the point is that his story just drew me in. It was so authentic and so heart-rending. It's like it was so authentic and so just warm and felt so real to me, and I could relate to it, that it made me want to get involved in this charity. And I think that's a perfect example, whether it's a charity, whether it's a business, whether it's a particular, a consultancy. When you believe the story that the person is telling, you're much more likely to want to trust them. You're much more likely to see yourself in them or in the stories that they tell. And that relatability helps you take the next step. It's just a very powerful sales tool.
And it's interesting because the word story can sometimes have a bad connotation, a negative connotation. But it actually is neutral, the word itself. And
yeah, I remember the first time I went to get a business card years and years ago, and I said, yeah, I'm a storyteller. And the person looked at me and said, if this is for business, do you want people to think that you're not telling the truth? And I was like, what? So yeah, there's definitely that connotation that telling stories is telling something imaginary. But I think that in most organizations now, in most companies, most businesses realize that the ability to tell a story is a superpower. And we all, again, I'm very much about telling the real story, telling the authentic story. And I think people who choose not to make up stuff instead realize that it just does not work. It doesn't work as well, for sure.
So what are the different types of stories that business might have?
Well, there's many different types of stories. And I think that, it depends on what stage the business is at. There's definitely a kind of an origin story for the business itself. Like I was describing about this charity, the origin story of how the charity came about and the story of the founder of the charity and so on. That's a very specific story. There's stories about why you choose particular products or services. There's stories about the experience and the transformation that the product or service provides for others. I mean, there's stories about pretty much every part of the business, and it can be put into every part of the business, whether it's in speaking or whether it's in collateral, the website or other marketing materials. There's an opportunity to use story, because the minute you use a story, people are more drawn in. They tend to remember how the story makes them feel, and that brings them closer to the person who's telling the story or the company that tells the story. And really, we can almost implant the story in so many different places. It just depends on the opportunity. But what happens is that we get tired of information. We don't remember information. And although certain types of information or statistics may impress us one way or the other, it doesn't move us emotionally, whereas story does. Story draws us in. It helps us relate. It helps us connect. And it moves us. And that's what we remember. And that's what sways us when we make a decision about whether to engage one vendor or another, whether to buy one service or another.
So what are the types of stories that sales professionals need at their fingertips?
Well, I think the most obvious stories that sales professionals need are stories about how what they're selling has transformed other people. So they're they're both customer stories, but also testimonial stories, which are, one is from the perspective of the seller, the other is from the perspective of the buyer. But what's really, really important is to be able to articulate well and in a very personal way the change or the transformation that's happened as a result of what the person is selling. I think they're the most important stories. But in addition to that, there's also the stories around, why did we even come up with this product or service to sell? Why is it important? What is the change that we want to make in the world or in the industry? And what's the story that had us want to make that change? I remember reading a story about a woman who had a brother who had really struggled with autism and how the educational system had really failed him. And she became very passionate as she grew up to go into education and to learn about how the system could apply for children like her brother. And she created some technology startup, and it was all really motivated by this experience she had watching her brother struggle because of a condition that he was born with, essentially. And so that type of story, again, that's an origin story. Again, why we do things, why we become passionate about things, why as a salesperson, even if it's not your own company, why do you care about what you're selling? And that can be difficult sometimes because not all salespeople care about what they're selling. But I would always maintain that the more you can care or show that you care and connect on some personal level with the thing you're selling, the more easy it's going to be for you to sell it. So it's about finding that story within yourself of, why do I care? Why do I actually care about this? And why should you care about this? That's how we connect around the product or service. And so it's a story that a salesperson really needs to be able to have ready and able to tell whenever they need to.
So would those stories, why do I care about this? Why you should care about this?
Mm-hmm.
Does that need to be the same story, or can that be two different stories?
It can be two very different stories. So, I mean, why I care about it should be very personal and very specific. Why you should care about it is often connected to the state of the world or the state of the industry. So there can be two quite different stories. There's lots of industries, there's lots of services where it's ripe for disruption. It's ready for change. And so, especially as an entrepreneur coming in with something new or something slightly different, being able to talk about what's wrong with this world and why I'm called to change it and why you should be called to change it. They're slightly different stories. And again, it's all about exploring what's been my experience that's brought me to this, and potentially what's the ideal client, what's their experience that brings you to this situation. I mean, oftentimes we kind of live with a situation that's not optimal in many areas of our life. And it's the way it is. It's the service that exists. It's what I can see in front of me. Whereas when a disruptor comes, when an entrepreneur comes or a small business comes and offers a different possibility, then that's ripe for telling these beautiful stories about the vision, about what's possible for the company who provides the service, but more importantly, for the customer who's going to buy it.
So I'm curious if you have the same experience, Lisa, that I have, because Salesology, we teach prospecting. We focus on the front end of the funnel. And part of that is storytelling. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be very hard to get people to tell stories. And I'm wondering if you have the same experience, and how why is it hard to get people when they're in a sales role, and then trying to get them to tell a story, they seem not to want to do that. And I'm curious as to why that is, if you have the same experience, and how do you move your clients to start being more comfortable telling their stories?
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. I mean, I think in general, people have this assumption that not just I don't want to tell a story, but I'm really bad at telling stories. They kind of compare themselves with really great storytellers out there. And they think, well, if I can't do it like that, then I can't do it at all. But what they miss is that we're all telling stories all the time, them included. So if you think about any any kind of average sitting around a dinner table with family or with friends, what's happening is storytelling. And one story leads to another story that leads to another story. And we're all feeding stories off each other. That's how conversation happens. And so I try to remind people that we are all storytellers, and we're not looking for performance level storytelling. And even in a professional situation, everybody can improve. And so not everybody is born, a great storyteller. Not everybody is born a great joke teller, but we can all improve on those skills, and we can vastly improve those skills. And I've seen it. I've worked with organizations who are, with people who typically are much more comfortable behind a screen than they are in front of people, with engineers and software developers. And I've done a lot of work in those areas. These people will tell me, oh, I don't know how to tell a story. Or more importantly, they'll say, I don't have any stories. But as I guide them through even their memories, even, exercises I do with them around kind of what was a story that you loved as a child, and what was it about? Or what was a story that a parent or a grandparent told you? Or, when did you experience story? Suddenly people open up. Their memory is really full of these moments of story in their lives. And this is true of, the majority of people I've worked with. I've been really blessed to work with thousands of people all over the world. And I've seen how we all connect to stories, and we were all enormously impacted by stories in our lives and are still. And so it's allowing them to kind of embrace their inner storyteller and say, you don't have to be a professional storyteller. You don't have to come across as a performer. You just have to talk about the experiences you've had. And then I teach them how to create a little structure and to add some story elements and to think about character and to think about the whole process of finding the right story for the right time. And so there's lots of things to learn along the way that helps them build their confidence. But essentially, I honestly believe that we're all storytellers. We're constantly telling the stories of our experience to people. And it's the most natural thing in the world. The minute something happens to us in our lives, whether it's walking down the street or going to a meeting or the minute anything meaningful happens in our life, the first thing we do is we run to tell someone. We tell our partners, we tell our family members, we tell our children, our parents, our best friends, our colleagues. That's what we do. We're a people that crave connection and tell stories. And so there is no such person who has either A, has no stories, or B, doesn't know how to tell them. It's about awakening it in them and helping them build the confidence that what they're telling is actually super interesting and important and has a role in their lives and in their work.
Well, wouldn't you say that engineer or sales professional or business owner that is saying, well, I don't have any stories or I'm not a good storyteller, that's just a story they're telling themselves?
Oh, absolutely.
As opposed to a story they're telling other people.
Yeah, exactly. And that opens up a whole other area of work I do around the inner story and how much our inner stories can hold us back at times. So yes, that's really the essence of a lot of the story coaching work I do is around, identifying what's the story that holds us back. Because anything that we experience as negative or conflict or anything, there's always a little story hiding in there that's telling us something that is usually not true. And so to be able to root out that story and to say, actually, I do have interesting stories and I have experiences that are worth telling that people are going to want to hear. But also learning then, well, how do we find the right stories at the right time? And what's the purpose of telling stories? Because we don't, there's no reason to tell stories for the sake of telling stories. The story is a vehicle, and you've got to be really clear what you're trying to tell a story for. And as you tell the story, then serve the audience and serve the purpose that you're telling the story for. So it's not like just sharing with our family interesting things that happened. I mean, that's fine. And all stories need to be told, just they don't all need to be told in a business context. In the business context, the story has to be super relevant. It has to be of service to the person who's listening to it, to the potential client or the client.
Yes. And I want to ask you more questions about that inner story and also the structure of a story. We're going to pause here for a moment for a word from our sponsor, but then when we come back, Lisa, I'm going to grill you about those two things.
Sounds good.
Okay, so now a word from our sponsor, Salesology 3X Appointments. You know how frustrating and stressful it is when you leave every sales meeting wondering if your sales team knows how to sell because they're not selling and all you ever hear from them are excuses. They blame your marketing, they say you need to do more social media, and they say you need a new website. You know something's wrong, but you don't quite know what it is, and you're even starting to wonder if it's you. You don't have a lot of options. You could just fire them all and start from scratch, but that would be expensive. And you're really sick of waking up in the middle of the night wondering how to fix this. Well, imagine instead that you have an easy to use, replicable system that ensures that your team can easily schedule qualified appointments. And imagine that your team is excited and motivated. No more excuses, and you feel good. Salesology 3X Appointments can make that happen. So if you are a business owner or a sales manager with an underperforming sales team, let's talk. Click on the link to my calendar in the show notes, schedule a time, and I look forward to meeting you. And we are back with Lisa Bloom, the story coach. So Lisa, I want to go back to something that you were talking about a little bit earlier, and that's the inner story. The stories that people tell themselves about themselves, their lives. And that can really get in the way sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was something I noticed. I noticed it over years, but I remember a specific situation where I was at an event, and every time I was in the event room, people were just really happy, talking about business, talking about abundance, talking about mindset. You know, it was just really kind of squeaky clean, shiny, beautiful place. But I also noticed that every time I went to the bathroom, I would overhear these women talking about divorce and talking about, problems with their kids and talking about illness and who's sick and who's getting better and who's in treatment and all kinds of interesting things. And I was struck by this kind of divide between the story they were telling others and the story they were telling people who were closer to them that was really their inner story. And then it really reminded me about how, so many of us, all of us really have these stories that hold us back, or, sometimes our inner story is perfectly fine. Sometimes our inner story is what kind of supports us in doing wonderful things and being super successful. But often the inner story is the story that tells us what we can't do or who we can't be. And so I think it's really interesting to shine a light on that and to be able to really look at those inner stories and begin to work with them and begin to transform them. Because when you change the inner story, when you change your story, you change the reality around you. And it's really, really fascinating. Now,
Yes.
One of the ways I think about it is if something happens, and I spoke before about how when something happens, we always go tell someone. When we tell a person that thing that just happened, what we tell is it's only a tiny percentage fact. The rest is our impression. It's our opinion. It's the way, the side of the bed we woke up in the morning. It's our previous history. It's our past experience. But when we tell that story, we act as if it's truth. We act as if this is how it happened. And so that can perpetuate into a story that we're super committed to, because we're very committed to our stories, whether they're service or not. And that can turn into a story that really does us a huge disservice because it tells a version that's not at all supportive or empowering. So when you can find that story and begin to transform it, it really does transform the reality that you have created around you in this meaning-making process that we have of telling stories.
Yes, I remember when I first started coaching salespeople, and I was coaching them on prospecting. And many of them would tell me very long, complicated stories about prospects that they had never spoken to. They would tell me, well, if I call this prospect, they're not going to be interested, or they're working with somebody else and they're very busy. And I mean, they would just have this whole long story about all these reasons that they couldn't reach out to the prospect because the prospect was just going to say no anyway, so why even bother? And it was really fascinating to me. Also the salespeople that would take something that a prospect would say to them and turn it into something else. Prospect would say, I can't talk now, but why don't you call me tomorrow? I have more time. And the salesperson that I was coaching would say, oh, they're not interested.
Yeah.
And I would say, well, how do you know that? Well, they couldn't talk to me. Yeah, but they said call them tomorrow. So it's very interesting the way the stories that people tell themselves can impact the behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And, oftentimes the fear that we have, or the concern or the anxiety, can really easily morph into a story that's totally believable, and we become very attached to it. And it's completely untrue. It has really no relevance to the actual reality of the situation objectively. And so I think it's really important to be able to stop ourselves in the moment of the telling of the story and just even ask that question, is this even true? Do I know this to be objectively true? Usually we don't. And how is this impacting me? Is this serving me, or is this doing a huge disservice? And if it's serving you, great, go for it, keep telling it. But if it's doing you a disservice, stop for a minute. Let's dig a little bit. Let's figure this out.
And so is that how you coach your clients, to do a reality check on whatever that story is?
Well, there's certainly an element of it is just awareness that everything is a story, and how do we find some kind of interrupt to the story that we're used to telling, so that we can use different tools and different ways of creating more powerful stories, more empowering stories. So yeah, the first stage is absolutely the awareness of, I'm telling a story here. And, and we don't have to disrespect that story. Every story we tell serves a purpose. And oftentimes that purpose was to protect us. But if the story is no longer serving us, then we have to figure out how to, either change it or completely transform it or let it go. There's lots of different ways to do that.
So if I want to tell a really powerful story, what is the structure of putting that together?
Well, the structure of a story is very simple. All you have to do is look at any movie, read any book, or, story structure is simple, start, middle, and end. So, the structure just has to follow through. I think what you're getting at is really like, how do I know that this story is going to be powerful? What is it about the story that's going to be powerful? And one of the things that I always say that I think is often just not paid attention to is we tend to tell stories because we find it interesting, or because it was remarkable in our experience. And from a business context, that's not relevant. It's not relevant that we find it interesting or that we find it remarkable. The only reason a story has the potential to be powerful is if it is super relevant to the concern of the person you're telling the story to. So whatever it is, knowing that audience, and whatever it is that keeps them up at night, whatever it is that is super interesting to them, that's where we need to direct our storytelling towards. And then to make it particularly powerful, we have to make it personal. And again, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to rip open your heart and, tell everything that you've ever experienced. But you do have to tell from a place of really authentic feeling, of really believing, of taking a stand about something. And I think that those are the ingredients, having emotional content, having it super relevant to the audience, making sure that it's on point, making sure that it stays on point, so that the message is clear, the transformation is clear, and the audience knows that it's about them.
Okay. Well, I love this conversation, Lisa. So I'm hoping that you will put your hand over your heart and promise to come back another time.
Absolutely.
So we can continue.
Absolutely. I'd be thrilled to.
Okay, good. Because I know you have a free gift about storytelling for our listeners. So could you share that?
Sure. So I published a book last year, which was really the culmination of my story work for, the last 15 years or so. It's called the Story Advantage. And, obviously the book exists in all places where books are, but the gift is that I have developed a toolkit to go with the book alongside the audio of the book itself, which you can find at story-coach.com/story-advantage-toolkit. So it's the Story Advantage Toolkit. You can find it at story-coach.com/story-advantage-toolkit. And there's, lots of different resources, but also the audio of the book itself.
Okay, and for our listeners that weren't able to quickly write down that link, we're going to put it in the show notes. So all you have to do is go to the show notes and click on the link so that you can get Lisa's free gift. And I know I'm going to do that right away too.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we have been talking with Lisa Bloom. She is the founder of Story Coach, and she promises to come back another time. If you found value in today's conversation, in today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one entrepreneur, one salesperson that you know that might also find value in today's conversation. And please share the link with them so that they can listen too. Please also do give us a good review. And thank you for listening to the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast. Till we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.